thanks everyone for coming. It's such a nice day. So it means a lot that you're taking your time here with me today. So my CDS project is about the decade of disruption in mobility. Um, I had to pick a flashy title to make it more appetizing. We're talking about cars here. So what does the decade of disruption mean? So the automotive sector is such an old sector. Fun fact, there hasn't been a new car brand since Tesla, or there hasn't been a new independent car brand since World War II, since the advent of Tesla. Tesla was the first independent car brand to succeed since World War II, is a better way to say it. The thing that's really exciting is the 2020s are like shaping up to be this decade that we're gonna have the roads completely changed. And I broke this down by the ACES framework. So there's different trends that are happening right now. So autonomous, which I defined as self-driving and safety systems. Connected, so these are digital services that automotive companies really want to offer people, make more personalization happen, and electric. This is the one that's getting all the hype, and rightly so. This is the trend that's going to shape the next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of things are underpinned on this shift to electric. And then shared, so these are ride sharing services and mobility. We've all used Uber, we've all used Lyft. And there are some trends going on along with them that I'll go through at the latter part of my paper. Just to level set, I want to set some major trends that are happening in the market as a whole. So why are we always talking about electric cars like nowadays? So environmental regulations have increased significantly, especially in Europe, China, and the US. The US is the particularly new market for environmental regulations. We've always had them, but they've gotten particularly strict since 2021, almost forcing car makers to really look at having electric vehicles in their fleet and shifting towards this probably by early 2030. My prediction is that the 70% to 80% of the vehicles sold in 10 years will be electric, and getting a gasoline car it'll be the outlier version. Other trends that I'm seeing are rising interest rates and threats of global recession are reducing investor appetite in autonomous vehicles and ride sharing. The things that I see in these two sectors, autonomous vehicles have a really long road to commercialization. They're quite interesting, but they're not there yet. And I mean, with a little credit crunch, we're seeing more consolidation in the sector and more bankruptcies. Same with ride sharing. I think COVID had the biggest impact on the way that we think about ride sharing, or that investors have thought about it. And now it's becoming more of a margins game than it ever was. The era of like promotional rides or that free money era, I think has come to a halt. The last major trend that I'm going to talk about is traditional car makers, cars that you probably all own, Toyota, Honda, GM, Ford. They're scrambling right now. This is a brave new world for them. None of their supply chains are optimized to address electric vehicles. And the way that they want to combat this is both by shifting those supply chains as well as investing in connected services, which I'm not sure is the right play, but I'll go into later in my presentation. So here's the summary of what I have to say. Electrification will be the defining trend, while autonomy will continue to improve. Connected services and shared services are kind of the lesser plays that I see in this region. So starting with autonomous. Personal AVs are kind of out of reach. So we all imagine this Jetsons future where we get in our car, press a button, and go from point A to point B. The costs involved and the difficulty of operations will probably make these not feasible, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. Specialized firms such as like Cruise, Zoox, or Motional are more likely to build and operate them in-house. So they're probably more in line with the shared services aspect of mobility. Advanced driving systems will improve significantly in cars. So instead of you pressing a button, going from your driveway to your friend's driveway, your car will be able to drive itself well on highways, potentially town roads, but it won't be able to do the process all by itself. But you're going to see more and more of that technology being implemented in cheaper cars, lower down the price point, and then higher up the price point. It'll be kind of nice. Like Mercedes has some nice systems, Cadillac has some nice systems. And consolidation will continue since the CapEx involved with these is incredible. For connected services, we're going to have OEMs I'm defining as automotive manufacturers. It stands for original equipment manufacturers. So OEMs will try to personalize these experiences. They keep saying that. They don't know what it means. I think it's a buzzword that is fun to throw around. It's fun to digitalize, but it doesn't really matter. What that means is they're trying subscription services all over the place. These B2C subscriptions are going to lead to unhappy customers such as yourselves, and I think is just a very, very short-term play that they're experimenting with now and will fail in the longer term. I think the only connected services that will be particularly interesting are potentially over-the-air updates for performance, as well as B2B connected services. So this is fleets or any vehicle that has to do something with business operations. These vehicles are going to have a lot more data, and they're going to be able to push a lot more data out. But I think that the use cases for them are mainly going to be in this B2B sector and not for B2C. Electrification is, again, like I said, is the largest trend. We're going to have a massive increase in EV adoption, especially in the developed world, with a supply chain that's still reeling from COVID, but it will catch up at a certain point. Price erosion will continue. We're going to have introduction of lower cost EVs, such as Chinese electric vehicles. China is the #1 producer of electric vehicles right now. And right now, the markets are completely firewalled. However, I think I really do believe that to have price erosion and to have consumers will demand cheaper options, and this is where they'll come from. We'll also have survival of the fittest, so unprepared OEMs will collapse in the longer term. Lastly, for shared, diversification of verticals will be key to survival. And what that means, I mean, we've all seen it. The Uber app has expanded just from a ride-sharing app into Uber Eats, Uber Delivery, and in some areas they have diversified services like Uber Pet, right? So these are specific market variations, but that's going to be really key because I think consumers are going to demand more and more of these super app functions. I think duopolies will continue to dominate markets, and there's some reasons that I can go into later about that. And that strong players are going to need to experiment with cost reduction. And in the longer term, that means potentially partnerships with AVs to reduce that operating mile cost. So level setting on what is autonomous driving. So there are 5 levels as defined by the Society of American Engineers, from level 0 to level 5. Most vehicles that are on the road, most modern cars with automatic braking are they're generally level 1. The thing about this is it's not a linear scaling. Vehicles, to get to a level 4 or level 5, are cars without steering wheels. It's incredibly difficult to get there, even though there's 5 levels. They might as well be scaled on a completely different axis. But where we're seeing the most development is between level 2 and 3, and this is where most of the advances are going to be made. Only a few specialized firms are going to be working in levels 4 and 5, and that trend will continue to the future. So here we are. Where are we today? The first level 4 vehicles, or the first level 4 AVs, are on the road in certain markets. Phoenix, San Francisco, Houston. These are regulator-friendly states. And these are what they look like. So vehicles that are really, really different from anything that we've ridden in. They look more like subway cars. I think what will be key for success is partnerships with existing ride-sharing platforms, which there's some leaders in the market, such as Motional and Nuro, that have this low cap, they're trying to spread out their capital expenditure, not building out their own platforms and relying on market leaders. Scaling costs are going to be high for somewhere like Cruise or Zoox, who are trying to build up their own platforms as well. So they are trying to get users to stop using Uber and use their own platform. And that's going to be a business play that I'm not sure is the best, but it's happening. Like I said, personal AVs are prohibitively expensive. I think ADAS systems like Tesla's Full Self-Drive and Mercedes Drive Pilot will be advancing to level 3, but they won't get past that. And I think that the reasons are cost prohibitive for an individual user to have. The Great Firewall will continue. So China has their own autonomous vehicle sets and their own testing protocols. However, we're seeing a complete bifurcation in terms of development, and I don't think the data is being shared between US development and Chinese development, and I'm not sure that they ever will be. So I think we're going to have almost these parallel systems of development where these vehicles can't operate on each other's roads. And consolidations will increase. Ford last year shut down their own AV driving service, and I think as the market continues to become a little more difficult, this trend might continue, and people in the autonomous space should focus on partnering with OEMs or partnering with other platforms in order to survive. So on the connected services side, I was saying that OEMs are really excited. So they're really excited about the subscription model. It sounds super good. You can sell software as a service. SaaS is great. What I don't think is going to happen there, right? So we have big tech connected services like CarPlay and Android, and these are baseline level. Like these are baseline for consumers, for most consumers. People like them. They're very intuitive. And I think that OEMs should be working to make their in-vehicle architecture more compatible with systems like this, rather than developing their own software. I think consumers are going to have a harder time adapting to custom software. It's a little pointless. And so the two players that I see bucking this trend are Tesla and General Motors. And I don't think that this will be very good in the long term. I think we'll see them shifting back to native digital players. OEMs are also looking for recurring revenues, right? Like I said, subscription models, and those come in the form of like over-the-air updates, subscription services, and even in-car advertising, which I think is further out because there's several regulations that will get in the way. It's just one of those things that people love to talk about. So BMW, for instance, is charging a subscription for remote start and for heated seats in their own vehicles at $15 a month, let's just say. So that was like the little diagram there. That's in the UK, they're saying like adaptive cruise control is $35 a month, and then your heated seats are £15 a month. I think this will just increase frustration amongst consumers, and it will drive people to try different brands. So this will result in a short-term profit, but I don't really see this as a very great way. I don't think it's a smart play for OEMs to do. And the only thing that I do see connected services being useful for is if they're adding operational value. So if you're able to gauge efficiency, location, and these are for fleet operations or last mile delivery. And these are just examples of things that people are trying. So Jaguar was trying to make your car into more of a video game. Mercedes, you can see how many panels are in the car now, and that's a production vehicle. And then BMW with their fun charging the customer for subscriptions. All right, so let's level set on electric cars. So Tesla is the leader in electric vehicles, but Chinese car makers are quickly catching up, and this is due to both market size and incentives by the Chinese government. BYD and SAIC are huge Chinese automakers, and like Tesla is number one, but I think that they are growing at rates beyond what we have with Tesla. The other thing I wanted to level set on is these are market shares, right? So we have annual sales and market shares. So in Scandinavian markets, Northern European markets, the buyers are very, very incentivized to buy electrical vehicles, and that is, regulations are a really, really big reason for why it's catching on so fast. That's why in Norway we have an adoption rate of over 90%. What we do have in the US, which is interesting, is California has become almost a market by itself at around 18% versus the general US at 7.7. I mean, Hanover is a good example of a place that isn't working for electric cars at the moment. But I think in 5 to 10 years, that's just going to have to change. The other notable thing is that Japan, the tech-forward country of Japan, is a laggard in this industry. And the Japanese car makers have been very slow to react to these market changes. So the EV market will become, the prediction that I have is the EV market will become increasingly competitive and unprepared OEMs will consolidate. So like I said, regulations in the developed world are forcing EV adoption. And it's forcing a huge business change for a lot of these traditional car makers. That's General Motors' new planned lineup for 2026. It looks nothing like what they have on the dealer lot right now. At present, with lithium-ion batteries, they have reached efficiencies and power that they have limited or marginal gains on right now. So I think for the next generation of EVs, there has to be a significant change in battery chemistry, and that might be forced on by reduction in material usage. So lithium is like the primary material that's being used, and it will become more of a constrained material as we have more and more EVs on the road. The EV ecosystem is underdeveloped, and we will see grid strain, especially in the US, and charging issues in the US in terms of compatibility of vehicles using different charge points. I think that this is an issue that's a collective issue. I'm not sure if it's going to be solved, but there's a lot of money being thrown at it through the IRA and other regulations like that. Like I said, I think Chinese firms will enter the US and EU markets at low price points under different brand names, under new novel brand names. So the whole electric vehicle, the seismic shift to electric vehicles has allowed newcomers to come to the market. And it doesn't have the same supply chains that ICE vehicles, which are internal combustion vehicles, have, which is what was preventing independent car makers from existing before. And then this is just an offhand prediction. And so if you're an executive from one of these companies, don't get mad at me. But for firms that I do kind of see some risk of consolidation slash distress in is Mazda, Honda, Stellantis, and Nissan. And these are because these are car makers that don't have suppliers that are easily changeable to the EV architecture. And a lot of these firms were invested in hydrogen fuel cell EVs in the past. And as we found out, they're difficult for consumer use. So I think the future is just battery electric vehicles. And there's limited use cases for hydrogen electric vehicles, such as trucking or shipping. So these are like large engines rather than the smaller ones that we need for everyday life. So lastly, I have predictions for ride sharing. So ride sharing will become more of a margins game than it already is, and efficiency will dictate the winners of this. Like I said, COVID decimated much of the ride sharing industry. People realized that growth wasn't necessarily the answer to profitability. So shared services firms will act more defensively, protecting their own home markets and using the winner take most model rather than relying on user growth and market growth. So I've spoken to people at these ride sharing firms, and then the way that they've been talking about it is that most markets are winner take most because it prevents like price erosion and it prevents like collapse, right? So it's like when you have too many firms entering that market, you have the pricing wars that we had before, they're not gonna happen anymore. And that it's winner take most because having some duopolistic nature rather than a monopoly reduces that risk of antitrust and less political pressures on a single company. Diversification of verticals is critical, like I mentioned. Consumers are preferring super apps over specialized apps. So niche firms should consider consolidation or mergers and use some of their logistics and integrate it with a larger firm is the viewpoint that I would take on this. And there's a race for efficiency and ability to lower per mile operating costs. And the factors that are influencing that is mainly wage inflation and driver turnover. These are huge costs for some company like Uber or Lyft or Ola. It's everywhere around the world. They're seeing difficulty with that, with driver retention. Gig workers are getting a little more fed up. AVs can help. If we have autonomous vehicles on the market that are able to operate a base level of demand at all times, this could offload some of that risk that you have when attracting drivers. My prediction is that firms like Uber or Lyft are going to lease specialized autonomous vehicle fleets for specific purposes. So examples of this is like Uber partnering with Nuro, which is that little cute autonomous vehicle up there, and that's just for grocery delivery and Uber Eats. And then another example that I heard about was Uber potentially, maybe in the long-term future, having autonomous vehicles for their Uber Black customers. So those are people that are high margin, not incentivized to wait, and those are who you really want to keep on your platform. So those are kind of my main predictions for what I see for the decade of disruption, and thanks for coming today.
Did you read the New York Times article about Norway's move to electric vehicles this morning?
No.
Just this morning.
Yep.
It was good. I mean, I think it echoes my experience in Norway too. Interestingly enough, you mentioned the grid collapsing. Norway really hasn't seen that. Is that because the U.S. grid is so weak?
So,
or not that you're an energy expert, but.
So I guess my prediction is we're making a lot of changes at one time. So maybe it's not we are making a shift, right, for base power from non-renewable dirty to renewables at the same time that we are having increased spikes, right, in usage I feel like Norway has base power from hydro, as far as I know. That's the majority of like the power system there. So there wasn't much of a change in that sense. Um, and I guess it's in the US, we do have regionalized power systems. So I don't think it's a universal thing, but I mean, like the example of like the Texas grid failing, like I think we could have more and more of these more isolated instances since we have like 5 or 6 grids in the US.
Do you see, one of the things that to me is the great wild card in all of this, I think China's the use case here, is the ability of regulation to make the timelines and the changes much more quickly or drawn out. Do you see that coming from the US? I think there's, obviously, you mentioned IRA, that certainly dumped a lot of money into developing EV charging stations across the US and other things. Like, what role do you expect regulators to play in this in the US and other countries?
Yeah, so the US is like a particularly interesting example where I see California regulators playing a bigger role than federal regulators. And the reason I say that is, so I do think, so right now with the IRA, there are incentives on certain vehicles, right? Up to $7,500 if the car is both made in the US and the battery is made in the US. That's really changing manufacturers where they're making investments. They're investing more in the US, and it's making it more difficult for them to make the car, frankly. But they're doing it because it's free money for the consumer. So I kind of see regulations as pushing consumers to act in a certain way. Um, and I see California being the biggest push for that because they're the biggest US market. Most companies want to sell in all 50 states, especially starting with California. So yeah, I guess I see regulations being a huge part in that push.
I mean, it's interesting. I was also reading this morning about Chinese scientists have claimed to be able to make batteries that replace the lithium with salt, with sodium.
Yeah.
And just like, one of the things really interesting, and we've seen it this year in a totally different way with AI, where technological innovations can drive like real rapid market changes in a way that we used to think didn't happen in these big markets. But like, it'd be interesting to see just what happens from a technological perspective that could really transform the way we think about this.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, one of the biggest wild cards, right, is that us as US consumers, we expect a car that works here in New Hampshire to work in Arizona and for it to work the same. And that is a difficulty that people saw selling into the US in the 1970s and 80s, like European car makers. And that's a difficulty that I think electric car makers are facing now. It's like, how big is the range, right? Because the trade-off is the battery is the most expensive part of it. I think right now, all of us are going for large battery size, large range size. But there could be a potential shift in the future. I didn't make predictions on this one because I really just don't know how it's going to shake out. But potentially we might have the purchasing habits of people may shift because they may be more realistic about their own lifestyles. But it's the US, so maybe not.
You think about the dramatic differences in utilization of vehicles in urban versus rural areas.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense why the US is a much more complicated market than a lot of other places.
I think if supply chain constraints are, if they become worse, which they could be, it might force consumers to modify their behavior. But at present, I think all car makers are kind of going for this like big battery, big range. Let's make something that's appealing to almost all consumers, at the expense, like at a higher price point.
It's hard because like you think about the long-term planning that goes into making automobiles, and it strikes me a little bit as the way that the Airbus versus Boeing played out, where essentially Boeing bet on lighter weight, more fuel efficient jets, and Airbus bet on much larger capacity jets, and Boeing won that. Won. And so it set them up for success for several years. Of course, they had some other issues, but
Yeah, so you have Chinese firms that have like a more diversified model. So the best-selling electric car in China is like $7,500, and it has a range of 70 miles, and it can go 50 miles an hour top speed. But that's one of those urban runabout vehicles that's not really allowed in the I mean, could be allowed in the US depending on, it would just putt around Hanover, but I don't think a lot of people would want that car.
Well, it's really also designed for cities, right? Like a very congested urban city
Yeah.
environment. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if consumers want that.
Other questions?
Yeah, or what are your thoughts on how like charging infrastructure will affect electric vehicle adoption, and are they different? Because there's a lot of news like people coming at it from the government subsidy angle. What's the business case for companies to open charging stations?
That's a really good question because the answer is it's a mess right now, complete mess. Like, I think that one of the reasons that Tesla's been so successful is they have that ecosystem. They thought about it from an end customer's point of view, and they developed superchargers at high traffic areas, and that's what they used the data for, was to develop exactly where the stations are going to be. Right now, we have these like ragtag consortium of like Electrify America or EVgo. So they're manufacturer sponsored partially, and they're getting subsidies from the IRA. I think right now the incentives are not aligned properly. So, like people are putting stations randomly, essentially, right? And it's partially because there's not a strong business case. I think that we're going to see that for the next 3 to 4 years. But once we have EV adoption at a critical mass, where maybe 20% of the vehicles are EVs, I think that some company will figure this out, right? They will do a better job of figuring out exactly what type of charger needs to be in what type of place. And those are going to be companies that are better at leveraging data analytics rather than just using government subsidies to just build, build, build. And I guess I kind of do see like some of these weaker firms failing. Like there's this charge company called Volta that recently folded, and in a way it was good. They were just putting like kind of crappy level 2 chargers in a lot of places, weren't servicing them properly. So I guess I do kind of see like ideally like a data analytics heavy company stop relying on those subsidies and those interest groups and relying more on like the pure business case. Because I think there is a business case actually for these chargers.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you think about the incentives then kind of reinforce the urban versus rural divide. I mean, this is sort of the way that a lot of companies that are highly regulated that provide services, like if you think about ISPs, their ability to run in rural areas and make money is diminished, so they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that kind of happening here with the EV side too, with charging stations? And
for sure, I do see that, but I also would argue that there is more backlash with electric vehicles in areas that feel like they probably don't need them as much. As in, I think that the adoption rates are going to be really difficult. I mean, different amongst rural and urban areas, and I think that's going to persist. Because I do think it's difficult to build infrastructure that works for every single person. I will say that one issue that is particularly acute amongst like our demographic is the fact that there's not enough charge infrastructure to support somebody who's not a homeowner, right? So in a rural area, you circumvent that problem because typically your home ownership rates are higher. You do have access to your own home charge port versus renters. And I think that's a problem that's going to be solved very soon. I think people are looking into that, and I think that that's probably where we'll see the best advancement.
And on the flip side of this, did you come across in your research how some of these firms are viewing public transportation investments? I would imagine that they might view it negatively if their market is going to be an urban area.
That's a super good question. I think that so kind of in let's just say 2016, right? You did have OEMs investing in public transit. Ford, for instance, tried to reinvent the public bus. So there was interest in that. I think that COVID did change the way that we move, right? So public transit rates are lower, urban occupancy rates are also lower. So I think there was a structural shift in the way that we're interested in public transit. that's probably one of the only like good tailwinds that the automotive sector has right now. You have increased interest in ownership of cars versus public transit. You have people moving out of cities, I think. So I'd say they're riding that tailwind at the moment. I think that'll continue to happen, but we'll see. Because right, if we become a more urbanized society as a whole, you'd have renewed interest in public transit, but typically those types of vehicles are not serviced. Like they're kind of a different investment, or they're almost completely a different sector than what the automotive companies play in. That's a good question though. Yeah, thank you.